There's a name you might not recognize, but one whose shadow looms large over the world of global finance. Sergey Ivanov. A name that most wouldn't recognize, but one whose influence runs deeper than most would ever suspect. This isn't the story of a loud, flashy billionaire or a politician flaunting their wealth. Sergey wasn't that kind of person. He never craved the cameras or the spotlight. In fact, you wouldn't even know he existed unless you were deep inside the world of finance. He was the kind of guy who worked behind the scenes, pulling strings and quietly moving money in ways that most couldn't even fathom. A man who understood the game of money better than most and built an empire in the unseen cracks of the global financial system. Sergey didn't come from wealth. He wasn't raised by powerful elites. He was from a small town in Russia, and he grew up with little. But his mind, it was sharp. Even as a young man, Sergey knew how the system worked, and, more importantly, how to bend the system to his will. By the early 2000s, as Russia was transitioning into the new post-Soviet world, Sergey saw an opportunity, and so began his rise. He wasn't just another businessman or financial mogul trying to make a quick buck. Sergey had a vision to move money, not just any money, but billions. Money from powerful oligarchs, corrupt officials, and state-backed companies that wanted to hide their wealth from the world. Sergey understood that in the new global financial order, money had to flow. And for that, he needed a system that was invisible, untraceable, and fast. His idea was simple: to launder money, but not in the way it's usually seen in movies. Sergey was thinking on a different level. He wasn't interested in smuggling drugs or arms. His goal was far more sophisticated: moving money in plain sight. By the mid-2000s, Sergey had built the framework for his money laundering empire. But how did he do it? He wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was a financial mastermind. It wasn't about carrying bags of cash or hiding diamonds in secret rooms. It was about moving money across borders, through banks, between corporations, and into the hands of the rich and powerful, without anyone knowing it was happening. The key to Sergey's plan was something known as mirror trading. It's a simple concept by buying an asset, like a stock, in one market, and then immediately sell it in another market at a slightly different price. You repeat this process, moving money between two accounts, and it looks like legitimate trading, even though nothing has really changed. Sergey wasn't just using this technique for a few trades. He had an entire system. He would use Russian banks, many of them are state-controlled, to funnel money out of the country. From there, the money would flow through shell companies in offshore havens like Cyprus or the British Virgin Islands, where regulations were lax and there was little oversight. But these companies existed only on paper, with no real operations, just phantoms designed to move money from one place to another. But here's the genius of Sergey's plan. While money was flowing through the system, it looked completely legitimate. It appeared to be nothing more than stock trades, loans, or investments. But in reality, billions of dollars were being washed clean and moved to new homes, bank accounts, properties, businesses, out of sight, out of reach. The true scale of Sergey's operations was staggering. By 2012, he had moved billions through his network, a web stretching from Russia to the United States, from London to the Caribbean. It was an invisible and untouchable global operation. Sergey wasn't just running a criminal enterprise. He was building a network. And networks are all about connections. The people he was moving money for weren't just anyone. They were some of the most powerful figures in Russia. These were oligarchs, high-ranking government officials, and wealthy businessmen with a lot to lose if their money was seized or their wealth was exposed. They needed a man who could keep them safe, out of the reach of international sanctions and scrutiny. And Sergey was that man. Through his connections to Russian banks, Sergey had access to the highest levels of power. He worked with banks like VTB and Sberbank, institutions that were not just financial entities, but also had close ties to the Russian government. These banks were the arteries through which Sergey's money laundering network flowed. They didn't ask questions, they didn't need to. All they cared about was keeping the money moving. And Sergey was not a man to trust easily. He was calculated, meticulous, and knew that in this world, loyalty was just as valuable as money. He surrounded himself with trusted operatives, financial experts, and a network of shadowy figures in tax havens. Together, they ensured that the money kept flowing, unnoticed and unchecked. By now, Sergey had built himself a global operation, from London's financial district to the Caribbean's tax havens, from New York's skyscrapers to Cyprus's sun-soaked shores. Sergey's influence reached far and wide. And it wasn't just the oligarchs and officials who trusted him. Banks and financial institutions across Europe and the United States turned a blind eye to the operation, allowing the money to move through their systems without a second glance. Sergey was the silent partner in some of the most lucrative transactions in the world. But as the saying goes, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. The beauty of Sergey's operation was that it wasn't just about laundering money. It was about making the money disappear. Through the use of offshore companies, shell entities, and complex financial instruments, Sergey was able to move billions without triggering red flags. To the world, everything appeared above board. Just legitimate business transactions happening in the global marketplace. But the impact of Sergey's network was far-reaching. It wasn't just about protecting the wealth of the Russian elite. This operation affected global markets. When billions are funneled through major banks, moving from one financial institution to another, the impact is felt far and wide. Investments are made, real estate is bought, and assets are shifted, all under the radar. For years, Sergey's empire moved money across 96 countries, slipping through the cracks of global financial systems. And as the money flowed, so did the power. Sergey wasn't just a facilitator of wealth, he was a gatekeeper, a man who controlled the flow of billions of dollars, enabling the elite to expand their empires while the rest of the world remained unaware. But Sergey's success also caught the attention of those who could make things difficult. The Western powers were beginning to catch on. The banks that once turned a blind eye were now under scrutiny. The global financial watchdogs were starting to ask questions. In 2015, things started to unravel. The US and European regulators were beginning to ask difficult questions. Banks like Deutsche Bank, which had become deeply entangled in Sergey's operation, were no longer able to keep the money flowing without raising suspicion. Authorities started tracing the mirror trades, and soon, the web was too large to ignore. By 2017, it all came crashing down. Deutsche Bank was fined a staggering $630 million for its role in facilitating these illegal transactions. But the damage had already been done. Sergey's network, his empire, was exposed. The global financial community was forced to reckon with the scale of the operation. But Sergey, he disappeared. The man who had built an empire of money moving silently through the world's financial systems was now a ghost. Despite the investigations, despite the exposure, Sergey managed to slip away, leaving the authorities with little more than a trail of paper. So, what happened to Sergey Ivanov? To this day, his whereabouts remain a mystery. Despite investigations, fines, and a global financial crisis triggered by his activities, Sergey managed to escape justice. And his wealth? It's believed to still be hidden, tucked away in offshore accounts and shell companies that few will ever find. And while the world continues to tighten regulations and crack down on money laundering, Sergey's story serves as a reminder that in the world of finance, money is not just about wealth. It's about power, and those who know how to move it can escape consequences, no matter how massive the operation. Sergey Ivanov may have vanished from the spotlight, but his legacy and his empire live on.
Thank you for watching Crime by Chapter. If this case left you wanting more, like and subscribe so you never miss a moment.